Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video from Oman Talks NRL SuperCoach. In today's video, the all-important discussion around who are the best must-have cheapies to pick in your round 1 squad. TLT has just dropped, so you should have the most up-to-date information now regarding potential cheapies. So if you enjoy the video, do give it a thumbs up. Do appreciate a subscription as well to the channel if you haven't already, and let's get straight into it. So starting off by taking a look at the hooker slot, not to be honest too many cheapies I think that we need to discuss here, and in each position that I go through I have circled some of my favorites. Tanner Boyd isn't necessarily a cheapie at 384k, but there's been a lot of discussion around him in the preseason, so I won't go into him in too much detail to be honest, but he could be a solid option for you as a kind of a mid to cheapie range hooker, but he also does have dual stats. You can also pick him up in your halfback spot. I'm personally not looking at running Tanner Boyd at the moment. Part of that is just due to the fact that round 5 they do have a bye, and so the first 2 weeks are good. I believe they have the Tigers and then the Dragons, then they run into the Melbourne and then the Cowboys before the bye. So my early thoughts are in round 5 I don't think he's going to be rising up too much in cash, so hopefully I can get a good look at him in the first 4 weeks of the season. If I feel like I need to make the swap, maybe from a Brandon Smith, maybe Harry Grant's underperforming, or maybe one of my halfbacks, at that point maybe I can make a move to Tanner Boyd. But the Titans did look pretty good in the trials. He should be goal kicking, so I don't think he's a bad pick. Personally though, I'm not looking at starting with him as a kind of a mid to cheapie hooker, but definitely someone that is worthwhile considering. Mitch Kenny, to be honest, I'm not too keen on. A lot of the talk is that Sonny Luke, who has been named on the bench for the Panthers, is actually going to play more minutes than Mitch Kenny. So the talk is potentially Mitch Kenny playing about 30-35 minutes, with Sonny Luke playing about 50 to 55. Now, Sonny Luke's price at 234k, that makes him just represent much better value than Mitch Kenny. So overall, don't think Kenny is really good option to be considering. I would be personally looking at someone like Sonny Luke instead if you are looking at starting with him as a cheap hooker. I know a few people out there have messaged me and shown teams with him starting. For me, because we haven't seen him yet in the trials, I'm a little bit kind of conservative and I don't really want to go there at this point in time. Panthers do also have a bye in round 3, so again his price growth will be kind of hampered by at least a week compared to say other players. So I don't think again he'll be one that we need to rush in on buying in that kind of crucial week round 4 period where a lot of player prices increase. Because he has that bye in round 3, it does delay him by a week. So again, I think we can maybe afford to wait and watch, but he probably will represent good value, especially if he's playing 50 to 55 minutes at 234k for a gun Panthers team. It will be hard to turn down, but again, not one that I'm looking at running with, I think, at the start of the season. If you've got Tanner Boyd, he could be very useful to provide some flexibility. If, say, you've got an underperforming halfback, you can use Tanner Boyd to switch to maybe bring in Sonny Luke, say, in round 5 or round 6. So that is something worth thinking about with your squad structure. Sonny Luke, I think, will be a pretty decent, cheap option, but not one that I'm looking at running with for the start of the season. Tyron Wishart has been named on the bench for the Storm in the number 14 spot. When you've got someone like Sonny Luke at the same price who's going to play probably more minutes than Wishart, don't really see him being an option, to be honest. He might play 15-20 minutes off the bench. And then Kum Tong from Manly, not named in the 17, played a little bit in the trials, but at bottom dollar, doesn't look like he's going to get a run in the 17, so don't think he's worth picking up in your hooker spot. Now next up we've got the front row forward position, where I think we probably know a little bit more now after TLT. Stefano Oitokumanu I think is very, very highly owned. You can see 38.1% at the time that I pulled this together. He has been named to start in the Tigers pack as of TLT, and so I think with Stefano, the reason why a lot of people are going for him, myself included, is just I think we know the potential and we know the gun quality of the actual player, and he has got more of a Supercoach friendly game. He does bust tackles, he does look to offload at times, and he can score a try as well. So a lot of attributes that we do like, when you look, especially when you're looking at a front row forward position that normally doesn't represent that much upside. So I like Oitokumanu. I think he should hopefully step up his game for 2023, and I think at 319k, he could even be your second front row forward. With the Nicho Hynes issue that we will get into probably in tonight's round 1 preview stream, I think if you don't start with Nicho Hynes, that gives you a lot of money to free up, which you can maybe look to go up to someone like a Ruben Cotter in front row forward, maybe paired with another mid-ranger like Christian Welch. Stefano is probably going to be a perfect third front row forward. He could potentially even squeeze to be your second front row forward. One of my early drafts that I was pretty keen on had him as my second front row forward. Still umming and ahhing about it, but I think at the end of the day, Oitokumanu should be a good cheapie option, and I think definitely should be one that you should consider for your round one team. Spencer Leniu doesn't really interest me too much. He's only a tick under the price of Oitokumanu, but he's coming off the bench for the Panthers. I don't really see too much change in his minutes though, to be honest. I think his best use is as an impact forward, playing maybe 25 to 30 minutes. So I don't think there's a lot of value with Spencer Leniu. He's not very highly owned at 9.9%, but that is probably higher than I was expecting. So probably not one that I would be looking to run with in round one. Now, Sean Keppie, I definitely want to touch on Sean Keppie. So he's been named to start at lock for Manly, 274k. I do think that Keppie will represent some value. Just taking a look at the Manly Sea Eagles bench for TLT round one, it looks like a fairly small bench. You've got KO Weeks, Ben Trbojevic, Ethan Bullimore, and Josh Alloway. You know, Weeks was a fullback playing in the trials for Manly. Ben Trbojevic normally plays on the edge or in the centre position. So I don't see a lot of minutes actually being, taken off Keppie by middles based on that Manly bench. So I think Keppie being named to start, it could also see good things for Jake Trbojevic, but I think Keppie being named to start, he has got dual status as well as a front row forward and second row forward. I think, he's priced at around a 26 average. I can probably see that going up to say 35 to 40, so 10 to 15 points of value. I think he hopefully should be one that can make us some money. Bit of a downside that he does have the buy in round two. So again, similar to Sonny Luke, does hamper his price rise early on. But I think in a front row forward position, you don't really want to be using too many trades there, in my opinion. So I'm pretty keen on having Sean Keppie, I think, in my front row forward bench maker. Maybe you can squeeze him in at second row forward, but I think there's enough options at second row forward that maybe he's just better to put in your front row forward. I think the dual status also makes him really appealing. So I'm definitely keen on Sean Keppie, and I think I'll be looking to start with him in round one now that he has been named at the lock spot, and also just seeing the bench makeup for Manly. Now, a few other guys who were named on the bench for their respective teams, Jack Hetherington, Tom Ale, and I'm not too keen on either of the two. Hetherington has been battling a bit of an issue injury-wise in the preseason, named on the bench for the Knights, so I think I don't see enough value there when you've got 10k more or less than 10k more. Sean Keppie named to start with a pretty weak forward-looking bench. So Hetherington doesn't really appeal for me. Tom Ale, there's a lot of discussion and question about what are the minutes going to be for rotation for a lot of those Warriors forwards. So I think Tom Ale probably will maybe have a very similar role, I think, to last season, but he's got a really good PPM. That's one good thing with him. So if the minutes are there or they do increase, he will be someone who should probably step up his points output. But I don't see too much of a change minutes-wise for him, given that the Warriors have recruited a lot of forwards now as well, and the minutes rotation with their pack is a little bit up in the air. So for me, not one that I'd be looking to take a punt on to start with. Just don't think there's going to be a lot of value in him. Now, the big kind of shock, I think, from TLT was Pasami Saulo being named to start for the Raiders with no Josh Papali'i in the starting lineup. Just reading some of the notes from TLT, so it looks like Josh Papali'i is out with a slight calf strain, and so Pasami Saulo took his spot. So I think that probably gives me enough doubt that I wouldn't be looking to now run with Saulo because, Josh Papali'i could be back in a week or 2 weeks, and I think that immediately puts the threat to Saulo's spot in the starting lineup. He might then move to the bench, but as we get to someone a little bit later down on this list in Franklin Pele, I think for someone who is probably going to play similar minutes but is 20k cheaper, I'd personally just run with that person. So for me, Saulo, I can't recommend. Yes, he's named to start, but I think don't get fooled by that. It looks like Josh Papali'i should be back hopefully sooner rather than later. Maybe NRL Physio will release an update on that one, and hopefully I'll retweet that as well when I do get that info. But it does seem like Papali'i is not going to be out long term, so Saulo for me doesn't quite make it. I think as a cheapie I'd recommend. Ben Murdoch-Masila, we don't quite know yet what the makeup will be for the Dragons, given that they've got the bye round one. I was never really too keen on him anyway. I know he's got dual, but around his price tag you had the likes of Davey Moale and also Franklin Pele for cheaper, who we've had more at least with Moale, we had a good idea that he was going to be named on the bench for the Rabbitohs, which he is. So for a similar price, I'd probably just lean with Moale, or what we've seen unfold today with the Bulldogs, with Luke Thompson actually picking up another injury, is Franklin Pele has made his way onto the bench for the Bulldogs. Now, I'm not just going to go out and say now Franklin Pele is an absolute must. 216k, 24.7% ownership, so he was quite highly owned. A lot of the talk, I think, leading up to TLT was that he probably wasn't going to make the 17. So I just wonder if he's now made it just because of some of these injuries to the middles at the Bulldogs. And so I think for me, I'd like to get an updated idea as to the timeline for Luke Thompson's absence, and that might then inform how long of his time Pele will actually be in the 17 for the Dogs. The only update that we have so far is that Luke Thompson injured his ankle at training and he's been ruled out for the opening game. So again, it's up in the air. So I'm really umming and ahhing about if I would start with Franklin Pele. My current front row forward setup did have Christian Welch, Oitokumanu, Moale and Sean Keppie, which I was kind of okay with, so it doesn't mean I need to start with Pele. Maybe I can trade down to him if it looks like he's absolutely locked in to the 17 and has good output. So for me, he's one of those ones where I think if you really need to save like 20k in your team and he's the only way that you can do it, I think it's fine with the hope that he keeps his place on the bench and gets continual minutes moving forward. But I think if you don't need that extra 20k, I would take the safer route. Maybe to start with a Davey Mawali, who we expect to be on the bench for the Rabbitohs long term, and maybe pair him up with a Kepi, and that way you've got probably a little bit more confidence, I think, with your front row forward bench. Because remember, we're going to need the depth this season now with the buys. So that's my thoughts on Pele. At the moment, I'm probably not going to start with him, but if we find out more information that Luke Thompson's injuries longer term, for example, I think at that point it'll be very hard to ignore Franklin Pele, and he probably will be in my team. Now, second row forward, lots and lots of players to get through here. Top of the list though is Jermaine Hopgood. I don't really think I need to spend too much time talking about Hopgood. Named to start for the Parramatta Eels, will probably be their starting lock for the first 3 weeks now that Ryan Madison has been suspended. I think at his price tag of 298k, he offers exceptional value. Looked really good in the trials. He looks like he's got a pretty friendly Supercoach game as well. Likes to offload, likes to bust tackles. And just reading some of the stuff I read in preseason, it seems as though he's quite crucial actually for the Parramatta attack in terms of link play. So maybe there's a potential for attacking stats there. One thing I will note though with Hopgood is that just looking at the Eels bench, they've got Momosia, Jack Murchie, Wiramu Greg, and Makatoa. So it's like a 4-forward bench rotation there. And so Josh Hodson has been named to start at number 9, but I'd be surprised if he played the full 80 minutes. So I wonder if maybe Hopgood will spend a bit of time at hooker. So I don't think that's going to be bad for his minutes, and he's still going to be playing in the middle, so he's still going to be making a bunch of tackles and lots of base stats as well. So I don't think that's going to detract from Hopgood. Just something to note if you've all of a sudden see Hopgood playing at number 9. That could be the case. I was a little bit surprised because I would have thought that Jacob Arthur would have made the bench spot for the Parramatta Eels. I wonder if it's maybe just this particular matchup against the Storm that they want to just kind of more physically win that battle. But Hopgood, I don't think I need to spend any more time. I think he is an absolute must cheapie, probably the best cheapie that we've got for 2023. Jackson Ford for the Warriors is a really interesting one, has been named to start for the Warriors as well over the likes of Josh Curran, but Jackson Ford has been named to start 281k, so he represents pretty decent value. Again, the question though that I mentioned with Tom Arley is just around the minutes. So at the moment, I'm personally not looking at starting with him, but I think it makes him much more difficult to ignore if he does actually kind of nail down that starting edge spot for the Warriors. So for me, I think we've got a decent crop of kind of second row forward cheapies with the likes of Matt Dury, Hopgood, Jacob Preston, and a lot of mid-range value. So you might not need to go too cheap on the second row forward bench. I should also mention Trent Loiero, named to start for the Storm. So 360k, he could also be someone who occupies a spot on your bench. So Jackson Ford might not be necessary for your bench makeup for 2RF. So if you can avoid it, I think it's similar with what I mentioned on Franklin Pele. Maybe you don't start with him. And if it looks like he's got the minutes, you can always trade down to him ideally. We've got boosts this season as well, similar to last. So we can use those boosts to be able to bring in these cheapies who are rising in price that we may not have started with. So I think there's a compelling case to start with him. I'm just a little bit uncertain with seeing Josh Curran on the bench there, what the minutes are going to look like. I've got more confidence in someone like Murata Niokore as well. So he's, for example, currently in my squad. Don't have Jackson Ford at the moment, but I think he will probably be a pretty decent cheapie. He's one that's hard to ignore. Again, I'm not 50-50. I'm not calling him an absolute must, but the fact that he's starting probably shows a good sign of faith from the coach as well. So he's probably what I'd call a good cheapie. So I don't think he's going to be a bad pick in your squad. I'll quickly touch on Tom Eisenhuth. I believe he's got picked up an injury. The only reason I listed him here was on the potential that he got a starting edge spot for the Storm. That's not happened. So for me, don't really think I can recommend him as a cheapie. Ray Stone, still very popularly owned, 27.2%, named on the bench for the Dolphins. Currently, he's not in my squad, but that's more just the case of I think there's been a lot of other good mid-range options that have cropped up and a few other players who are a bit cheaper than Ray Stone. It just kind of meant I didn't feel the need to actually have him in my squad. Again, I'll reiterate what I said in the 2RF video. Don't think he's going to be a bad pick. Just looking at his PPM for the 3 games he played for the Eels last season, he had a PPM of 1.14. And in games where he played 22, 30, and 25 minutes, he had scores of 20, 26, and 42. Although that 42 did include a double. So the base stats are they're a little bit under the 1.0. So I think that 1.14 PPM is actually elevated by that try scoring that he had in that round 3 game. So the PPM isn't actually probably quite as strong as what I thought it would be. So that's maybe another reason why you may want to just avoid Ray Stone to start with. Again, don't think he'll be a bad cheapie at 246k. He's probably going to be one of those slow burn type cheapies, but maybe not one who'll come out of the blocks really fast. And like automatically I'd prefer someone like a Matt Dury, who I've got circled there. So Dury's been named to start by the Eels at 234k. I do think he's going to be someone I run with from the beginning of the season, because when Sean Lane was fit, Matt Dury was playing on the other edge spot that was vacated by Isaiah Papali'i. Obviously now Sean Lane has picked up a jaw fracture, which has made room for Bryce Cartwright to actually get a starting spot, and so I've got him on the list here as well, 234k. I'm at the moment not looking at running with someone like Bryce Cartwright. Main reason being is that I think as soon as Sean Lane is coming back, which I think is tipped to be around round 5 or 6, I think Cartwright is out of the team. I just wonder, that's going to hamper his price growth, and he's going to be one that you probably will have to trade out fairly soon after he's made a little bit of money. And I just wonder if he's going to make enough money to justify his selection. Whereas someone like Dury for the same price, I think has just got much more safer minutes prospect moving forward, given that he was already projected to start for the Eels despite the Sean Lane injury. So Dury I'm quite confident in. I think he will be a good cheapie to go with, but not feeling quite the same as Bryce Cartwright. I know he's been a Supercoach gun in the past, and I know a lot of people are going to ask me, should I get on the Cardi party? I'm personally not yet on the Cardi party for those reasons that I mentioned. Going up the list to someone like Jack Gazzeski, don't think he's going to be someone who I'll run with as well. Named on the bench for the Cowboys, just hard to see where the minutes will come in, and I think the price is becoming a little bit awkward at 246k. Josh Schuster we know is out for round 1, and then they have a bye in round 2. Because he's had a history of calf strains where he's taken a little bit longer to actually get back on the park compared to what the initial timeline was, I'm not looking at starting with Schuster anymore in my squad. We'll get onto the halves and 5/8s, but we do have a cheap 5/8 halfback that we can use as a placeholder for Schuster instead. So I feel fairly comfortable now not starting with Schuster, I think, in my round 1 team. But I think he'll be definitely someone who we will look to jump on moving forward. But I think the history of prolonged issues with calf strains means I'm not taking the risk, I think, with starting him in my 5/8 spot. Maybe in your 2RF spot, but I think there's enough other options where you can look to fill in the gaps with other players who should rise up in price and make you some money. And then you can always trade down to Schuster. I think, let's say if you have a couple of mid-range or second forwards, you can trade out the underperforming one to Schuster when he's back and maybe just before he's about to rise in price. So that's what I'm looking to do with Schuster. Brendan Piakura was named on the extended bench for the Broncos, so not in the 17, so don't think he's an option. Now, Sean Blaw, named to start for the West Tigers, definitely worth speaking about him. So I'm not, again, particularly too... I'm struggling to find what the right word is. I'm a little bit conservative again, I think, on Sean Blaw, because I do think that once John Bateman is fully integrated and fully fit for the Tigers, he's going to make his way into that starting edge spot. And then I do think Sean Blaw is going to be named on the bench. I can see the reason for starting him just for the sense that he's got a few good games coming up for the Tigers. Their early draw, like the first 3 rounds, is quite good. But I'm just going to read a quote that I've seen on Twitter just regarding John Bateman, and this came from Tim Sheens. It says that he's been running 5 kilometers and 10 kilometer runs in England. It's not a chronic thing regarding an ankle knock that he picked up in the World Cup. He's trained well yesterday, as in physically, but he hasn't run yet with the team. They've got investment in Bateman for 4 years, and for the first few weeks, he's not particularly worried about it. To me, that sounds like they're just playing it very safe with Bateman, but sooner rather than later, he's probably going to get integrated into the squad. I'm reading a quote from NBWT, who's a big kind of Tigers Twitter account, and he's mentioned that Bateman is physically in a position to play, and in previous years probably would have played, but there's still a mid to long-term element taken into consideration, so they're playing it very safe with him. So to me, it sounds like, maybe round 2, maybe round 3, Bateman could be back, and that could just immediately hamper any kind of good price rises out of Sean Blaw. So while I would have loved to have Sean Blaw as a starting second row forward for 234k, I do think it's a slight bit of a risk, so I'm probably again not going to advise him as a must cheapie. I think there's another few options around that 234k price, maybe the likes of Matt Dury, maybe a Ray Stone for 10k more, who at least you're guaranteed with some minutes long term. I'd probably say they're safer options than someone like Sean Blaw. Trey Mooney, I had him on the list here, but not named in the starting 17 for the Raiders, so don't think he's an option. Same with Jack Howarth and Seo Wong from the Roosters, so probably not worth going into too much detail about them. But Jacob Preston at 200k, named in the 17 for the Bulldogs as the number actual 17. So Wacko's Whispers posted on Twitter, I think last week, that he was set to make his debut. And this is prior to any kind of issues with Luke Thompson picking up an injury. So for me, that gives me some level of a confidence that he was going to be in their starting 17 anyway, where I don't have quite the same level of confidence with someone like Franklin Pele, for example. So Preston, the minutes might not quite be there. Playing as number 17, he might maybe play like 15, 20 minutes, but he is bottom dollar at 200k. So I'm personally okay with starting with him because of the fact that he is bottom dollar. And I think long term, it seems as though he should hopefully be someone that we can expect to be named in the 17. For me, it's just the case that he was named there, or Wacko's Whispers posted that he was going to be named in the 17, and that was prior to any issues with Luke Thompson. There are issues now, obviously, with the Bulldogs middle forwards minutes, so someone like Jacob Preston could be good, and could hopefully play a few more minutes in the early parts of the season, make us a bit more money. So I do like Preston as a cheapie to start with in your second row forward. Moving on to the halfback and 5/8s, to be totally honest, there's not a lot of options I think that we need to go into detail here. I've got Schuster written again at the bottom, but I've just summarized my thoughts on him in the last section, so I won't go into him much more. I quickly added Cooper Johns here to this list because he's taking the place of Schuster in the Manly squad. At 340k, he's a little bit awkwardly priced, and I don't think I can recommend him just because, let's say Schuster's timeline is as expected, he comes back in round 3, and you've lost any potential price rises out of Cooper Johns. So for me, it's too much of a risk, wouldn't be going there. Similar with Jacob Arthur as well, named out of the 17, so there's obviously going to be some question marks about his minutes moving forward. So again, not one that I would be considering. Braden Trindle has been named to start for the Sharks with Nico Hines ruled out for round 1 due to his calf complaint. Again, the fact that we don't have a firm idea of the timeline of Nico Hines, the fact that he was challenging to be fit for round 1, probably suggests that Nico Hines is going to be straight back for round 2 most likely. So I think Trindle automatically then gets taken out of the team. So again, long term, don't like him as an option. Now, Isaiah Katoa is probably the answer to all of our Josh Schuster issues. So 216k, he's dual halfback and 5/8. You can pick him in either spot. So I think that really opens up that now that we can kind of, I think, lock in a cheaper option at that halfback 5/8 spot, where previously we were only relying on Schuster. Just reading some comments as well from Michael Chammas from the Sydney Morning Herald around the selection of Katoa, because I think leading up to TLT, the expectation was that it was going to be Anthony Milford as the starting 5/8, and I was very kind of vocal about that, so I kind of have to eat my own words now, because the last few weeks I've been advising that Katoa is probably not going to be the guy to go for. But just reading those comments, so he said a fortnight ago he expected and the plan was to start with Milford, but it appears that Bennett had a change of heart after Milford's performances in the trials, and so this is some quotes around Katoa from Wayne Bennett. We bought him also to do the job here and expect it may take him a bit of time, but he's a wonderful player, a great young man. I can't fault him. He's had a good preseason and hasn't missed a beat. So overly positive, I guess, on Katoa. We know that, Bennett could probably change his mind at any point. I like the fact that he does says that we expect him, it may take him a bit of time. Hopefully that's an indication that he's willing to persist with Katoa, because we do expect that the Dolphins are going to be poor to begin the season. And, it's very easy to then use kind of Katoa as a scapegoat, 18-year-old 5'8", swap him for Milford, who has obviously played with Wayne Bennett in the past. But I think those quotes give me some level of encouragement that hopefully they stick with him in the longer term. I don't expect him to be a massive point scorer. Probably not going to be someone you're going to play in your 17. But at 216k, starting, playing 80 minutes, I do think that there is a prospect of him being a somewhat okay, slow burn cash cow. And I like the fact that he's dual, so he enables some flexibility there as well. So I'm expecting that 36.6% ownership to skyrocket, and I think I will be starting with him as well. And I can advise him probably as a good cheapie. Other players here that I've got, Jonah Pezzett, only got him here because of his some trial performances, but not named for the Storm. Jaden Sullivan for the Dragons, again, has a bye this week, kind of awkwardly priced at 319k. Luke Metcalf from the Warriors is probably someone to just keep in the back of your mind, because he looked really good in the trials, but had picked up an injury, so he's going to be out for the first few weeks of the season. So not one that you look to start with, but I think definitely someone worth keeping in the back of your mind, just in case he comes into the frame in a few weeks from now. But I think Katoa looks like the clear standout cheapie in this halfback and 5'8 position. Now, taking a look at the final positions of centre wing and fullback, lots of cheapies to go through here. So I might just start off with some of the bottom dollar ones who I think are pretty safe. Will Warbrick from the Melbourne Storm and Paul Alamotti from the Bulldogs, both been named to start by their respective clubs. I do think that these guys are going to be pretty safe minutes-wise. The talk leading up to TLT was that they were going to get a starting spot. I think Warbrick, especially playing for a good Melbourne side at 200k, looks almost unavoidable. And there's been a lot of hype around Alamotti, I think, as well. So for sure, I highly recommend them as absolute must cheapies to lock into your centre wing. Khan Pereira, I think, is going to be one I'll also start with. Very good performances in the trial, scored a bucket load of tries. There is a lingering issue, though, of Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly is currently suspended until round 3, at which point you'd expect him maybe to come back into the centre spot, which is currently played by Philip Sami. Sami could maybe move to the wing, and that could maybe force out Khan Pereira. I'm kind of positive though that Pereira hopefully just gets locked into his position, and then it'll be between Philip Sammy and Brian Kelly, because Khan Pereira looks really good as a finisher. So hopefully Holbrook has got the sense to keep Khan Pereira moving forward. I just wanted to mention that around Brian Kelly just to manage some expectations. It's probably worth not using Khan Pereira as a fourth center wing, just for the fact that there is that lingering doubt that maybe in round 3 his spot gets taken by Brian Kelly. So I think he's going to be one of those ones who I'll probably definitely start with, but I'll keep on my bench. He might be a good play in matchups, like even this week, for example, against the Tigers, next week against the Dragons. It's not probably a bad idea to actually play Khan Pereira in your 17, but probably wouldn't be long-term relying on him as a fourth center wing just because of that lingering Brian Kelly issue. The bottom 3 around McLean, Bostock and Tavare, none of them got named by their respective clubs, so not really going to be ones that I'm going to be considering. I've got Haimul Hunt here at 234k, named to start for the Knights. I know a lot of people out there on Twitter were a little bit disappointed that Greg Marzhew hasn't been named by the Knights and not even named in the entire squad. So no idea what's happening there. Maybe it's an injury, but I think that the fact that maybe Marzhew could be back next week, for example, who knows what the minutes are going to be like for Haimul Hunt. So I probably can't recommend him again when we've got other probably good cheapies, I think, in the center wing. Turuva has been named as the starting winger for the Panthers, so definitely looks like he's got first crack at that vacated wing spot from Taylor May. He's been named in the number 2 jersey for the Panthers, which suggests he's going to play in the left wing. There's been some talk that Brian To'o is going to play in the left wing instead, but to be honest, at 275k, playing outside of a good Panthers attack, to me, it doesn't really matter as much if he's playing on the left or the right. Left is obviously great for him, but at 275k, I think he's at a cheap enough price. You're getting into the Panthers squad there. That, to me, Turuva becomes almost close to a must as well. And I'm probably going to be looking to use him as my fourth center wing, just knowing that he's playing for a gun Panthers side. Remus Smith at 316k is a cheapie that I've seen a few people ask me about. I've never really been overly interested, I think, in Remus Smith. I just think now you've got Will Warbrick. I don't think there's a need to double up, I guess, with the Storm's backs and go for Remus Smith. Don't necessarily think he's also someone who historically has been great Supercoach-wise, so I'm probably not looking at him. Another player I'm also not looking at too much is Hamiso Tabuai-Fidow, named as expected at fullback for the Dolphins, but I think his ownership has been continually on the decline. I think the fact that the Dolphins didn't look overly convincing in the trials, and I think Hamiso is one of those players who doesn't have great base stats, so I think he could be one of those players who gets you like those potentially 15 to 20 point games, which I don't think we want, especially at 330k. So I've kind of leaned away from going with Hamiso as well. One of the big 50-50s in my current team is actually between Chance Nickel-Klukstad and also Isaac Thompson. So Nickel-Klukstad named at fullback for the Warriors, Isaac Thompson named on the right wing for the Rabbitohs. Currently I've got Isaac Thompson instead. Main reason for that is that he's got good base stats, and I think he's playing for a better overall attack in the Rabbitohs. And wingers are good in the Rabbitohs system. They're constantly running sweep plays for Alex Johnston. Even last year, to be honest, they started going to their right a little bit more than what I was expecting. In the 2 games he played last season, had an average of 64, scoring a try in both games, but I think you can kind of expect that for a right winger for the Rabbitohs. The only con with him is that Taane Milne is back in round 2 from suspension, and so there's just that lingering doubt of, is Isaac Thompson actually going to make it past round 2? I think talking to a few Rabbitohs fans, I think they prefer Isaac Thompson. Taane Milne has had a bit of an issue before just with kind of, suspensions and things like that. Isaac Thompson is a bit of a bigger body, so he's probably better out of the backfield in terms of, kick returns and stuff. So at the moment, I'm leaning with Isaac Thompson purely on the fact and the hope that he, nails his spot and also is playing for a better team. But I think if you're kind of uncomfortable with that, I think Nickel-Klukstad will be just fine for you. Priced at 327k and an average of 31. Realistically, I see him being someone who'll get up to kind of the 45 to say maybe 50 range in terms of average. I think he'll just be a really solid guy with decent base stats who'll chip in every now and then with the occasional attacking stat as well. And so it could be someone that's worthwhile also considering. And, if you're really a 50-50 between the two, Nickel-Klukstad is at higher ownership, so maybe you could just go with the crowd. One good thing with Isaac Thompson, though, is that the Rabbitohs don't have a bye until like round 16, I believe. So there's a real clear runway of games where you don't really have to worry about Isaac Thompson's position in terms of buys. It's only really his starting spot and Taane Milne potentially being a risk to him. So at the moment, I'm leaning Thompson, but I don't think Nickel-Klukstad is going to be a bad option. They're not quite that, the genuine cheapies. They're around that mid 300k range, but I think they're still going to be solid options for you. A couple of other players who I'll quickly touch on. Terrell Sloan got the bye round 1, and I've just never really been too keen on Sloan just from a Supercoach stats perspective. He doesn't really have the base stats. He can get the attacking stats, but Dragons do have a good run of games after their bye, but again, I'm happy to wait and watch. I don't think you need to start with him in round 1. Hayes Dunster as well hasn't been named on the right wing for the Eels. Bailey Simonson has been able to make it back for the Eels in time for round 1, so don't think Dunster is going to be a great consideration for us now from round 1. And Harley Smith-Shields has been named in the centres for the Raiders, 300k. It just feels a bit awkward, and I never feel like the centres for the Raiders ever really are good for Supercoach point scoring. For me, the way I view the Raiders is that their attack is kind of more heavily reliant on their forwards and their kind of edge back rowers, like, the Hudson Youngs, Howie Ranara. Their props do also get involved in attacking stats, like Tarpany, Josh Papali'i loves a try. I just don't see the centres being great for Supercoach, and I think his price is a little bit awkward at 300k, so I don't recommend him really as a cheapie. I think you've got plenty other options below him in the likes of Taruva, Alamotti, Warbrick, Camperera, who are probably all better options and cheaper, and then just above his price with Isaac Thompson, Nickel Klukstad, Tommy Talau, even at 301k, I all view as better options. Tommy Talau, I haven't actually got in my current squad setup, but I may have been overlooking him. The Tigers do look an improved outfit, good draw for the first 3 weeks, and 301k. The numbers that I've got for Tommy Talau are his 2021 numbers, where he averaged 41. So there could be some value in him. Whether I include him or not just really depends on my center wing makeup. I've currently run Brian To'o and Val Holmes, so that leaves 5 other spots for cheapies, which at the moment I believe I've got Thompson, Taruva, Alamotti, Warbrick, and Camperera. So I just haven't really made space for Tommy Talau. But I think if you're looking to save money and you are going a bit cheaper in your center wing overall, I think Talau is going to be a good option. He's probably going to be pretty safe minutes-wise and position-wise for the Tigers. So I think he's going to be a solid option. 300k, a little bit awkward, but I prefer him as a prospect to, say, someone like Harley Smith-Shields. So don't think he's going to be a bad cheapie, but not an absolute must-own. Alright guys, that is my wrap up of the best cheapies to consider ahead of the Round 1 2023 NRL Supercoach season. TLT is here, Round 1 is almost here. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and are all hyped just as much as me. Do please give the video a like if you enjoyed it and found value out of it. Please consider subscribing as well to see more content. See you all in the next video.